It is a big day of deadlines as the vote count continues, and Joe Biden's lead continues to grow in Pennsylvania and Georgia. Just now, at 5 p.m. Eastern Time, the deadline has passed for mail-in ballots to arrive in Pennsylvania. You can see the vote count in Philadelphia here. All ballots that arrived before 5 will count unless they were clearly postmarked after Election Day. These ballots remain separated from the rest of the count. That leaves open the possibility of a legal challenge after the U.S. Supreme Court allowed them last month. As of our last update, less than 113,000 ballots remain in Pennsylvania. Biden currently leads by more than 14,000 votes after overtaking President Trump last night. In Georgia, military and overseas ballots are due by close of business today. We now know there are more than 8,000 ballots that were sent out but not yet returned. That is more than the margin of just 1,500 votes. But just because ballots have been distributed doesn't mean they'll all be counted. Cast. Overall, Joe Biden is sitting on a lead of 253 electoral votes to President Trump's 213. 270 are needed to win. Biden needs to win Pennsylvania, where he's now leading, or 2 of the 4 from Georgia, Nevada, and Arizona, and North Carolina. President Trump must win Pennsylvania and at least 3 of those 4 states. Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zeke Miller, and Greg Bluestein join me now. Caitlin is CBSN's political reporter. She's following the vote count in Philadelphia. Zeke is a CBSN political contributor and a White House reporter for the Associated Press. And Greg is a political reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Welcome to you all. It is great to be with you on a Friday, not typically when we have red and blue, but I think we should all start with some deep breathing exercises, starting with me. Zeke, Arweja Jang is reporting right now on the mood inside the White House, saying that today it is somber, very empty, with several aides not showing up for work. But President Trump is going ahead full force with whatever legal options are still available. What are those options, Zeke, and do they look particularly hopeful for the president?
You know, we've seen a flurry of legal activity from the president's campaign over the last 48, 72 hours now. They have ranged from everything from demanding access or closer access to ballot tabulation, which we saw in Philadelphia and in Michigan. It's been, as you mentioned, that those ballots that have been segregated out in Pennsylvania, they've tried to intervene to try to have those stop being counted. All of the legal action, there have been other threats of legal action out in Nevada, of trying to purge voter rolls and things like that. But all of that taken together, there's no evidence yet that any of that action will do anything to materially alter the vote count. In Pennsylvania, to the best we can tell, the number of ballots that have come in after Election Day that would be covered by this, would be segregated out as such a very small number that they are highly unlikely to affect the vote count, for instance. And the observation of ballots, that could be litigated out, but it won't again change the vote count. And so that's sort of where we are. We're seeing a lot of sort of talk from the Trump campaign, from Republicans, as they've tried to sort of create a lot of stir around this process, as the president himself has tried to undermine public confidence in the vote. But very little actually that, and certainly no supported allegations of anything that could materially affect how this election will turn out.
Well, Caitlin, I want to focus in on one of their complaints about poll watchers. The president's team wanted the vote count stopped, claiming their observers did not have access to the count. But when they got into court, it turned out that wasn't actually the case, right?
That's right. They're focused here in Philadelphia, where the votes are still being counted in this building next to me at the Pennsylvania Convention Center. The Trump campaign was arguing that their poll watchers weren't allowed close enough to view the ballot counts, but officials here say that there was some confusion, that they actually are allowed in there. And as we've talked about before, this has all been essentially televised. There have been cameras in this facility the whole entire time, round the clock, as workers have been counting those votes. And then you go over to Allegheny County, same thing, and you can kind of see the footage in Allegheny County as those votes are being counted as well. Here in Pennsylvania, the campaign is really trying to kind of focus on the vote counting itself, because as the votes come in, as they're tallied, Biden's lead in Pennsylvania continues to grow. Right now, he's at about 14,500 vote lead here in Pennsylvania, with still more votes to go. On the ground here, it feels like Philadelphia is the center of the political universe right now, as everybody's waiting for that final count in Pennsylvania, because if Biden wins this state, if he turns out to hold this lead, he will get those 270 electoral votes. So you're seeing this situation behind me where we've seen demonstrators out here all day, supporters of the president on one side, advocates for counting every vote on the other side. So it certainly, and choppers overhead, if you can hear, it certainly feels like everybody knows this could come down to Pennsylvania and these votes.
Absolutely. Meantime, Greg, in Georgia, if the margin stays under 0.5 percentage point, the loser can request a recount. So does that look like where we're headed?
It does. Secretary of State Brad Raffensperger said it's almost a definite that there will be a recount in Georgia, which means that we're going to be plunged into a little bit longer uncertainty, because right now Joe Biden has a lead of about 1,500 or so votes in Georgia. There's another trove of a few thousand absentee ballots being counted right now in Gwinnett County, one of Metro Atlanta's largest suburbs. It's Democratic leaning, so that should cushion Joe Biden's advantage here a little bit. But he's got just a few thousand votes right there of an edge right now.
And Greg, what would a Georgia recount look like, and how long could it take?
Yeah, it could take some time, because we've never had this many, just like many other states, we've never had this many mail-in ballots. Usually there's tens of thousands, maybe 100,000 or so mail-in ballots. But now we've got a record number of mail-in ballots and a new electoral system that state officials are navigating. So we're talking about sort of uncharted territory for state election officials. And they acknowledge that. They acknowledge that there's no telling how long a recount could take in Georgia if and when it comes to that.
Well, Caitlin, we know that Joe Biden is planning a primetime speech for tonight if the race ends up being called by that time. We also know President Trump is not planning to concede at this point. So what happens then in that case?
Well, there is nothing in the Constitution that requires a presidential candidate to concede the race. It's really just seen as a tradition, a way to smooth over tensions and to help start the process for a peaceful transfer of power. Candidates usually concede, but ultimately they don't have to. What matters here is Article 2 of the Constitution, which says that state electors meet on December 14th. The new Congress, when it comes in on January 6th, ratifies the results, and that's it. And I've talked to constitutional scholars about this. We've been reporting on this for several months, whether a president has to concede, and scholars agree that by January 20th, that is Inauguration Day, at noon, the new president or whoever is inaugurated as president, the Secret Service has jurisdiction, and whoever remains in the White House is a guest at that point and not a president. As one put it to me, if that person doesn't leave and isn't wanted there, it's an unwanted guest and could become an arrested guest. So there are parameters in place to ensure a peaceful transition of power that doesn't hinge on a candidate conceding.
Well, Zeke, I wonder, on a national level, are Republicans largely sticking with the president? Are they defending or amplifying his claims, or are some disagreeing with him?
You know, we're really starting to see the beginnings of a Republican reckoning right here over not just Donald Trump, but Trumpism more broadly. There are obviously a number of Republicans in Washington who have been fairly vocal in criticism of the president for his public comments regarding the vote, trying to undermine and spread baseless allegations about voter fraud and misconduct, when in fact this electoral process, even given the pandemic and everything around, and the novel ways of voting that Greg talked about in other states, has gone pretty well. And so, we've heard some Republicans sort of chastise the president on that. On the other side, we've seen an effort. It was kind of interesting. We saw this on Thursday, driven in part by the president's adult children, to sort of call out potential 2024 Republican candidates to sort of goading them into, or sort of bullying them into echoing the president's message and defending the president and amplifying his claims, in part because there is that very large, not a majority necessarily, but a very large component of Republican voters out there who are deeply, deeply loyal to Trump himself and not to the Republican Party as much. So we're starting to see a bit of a break there. And if this election goes where if Joe Biden does pull it out there, we're going to see sort of those two wings of the Republican Party probably find themselves at a conflict and odds very quickly, and that will have a real long-term consequences for the two-party system in terms of what is the ultimate fate of the Republican Party here. And we'll see that. We're seeing a similar thing happen on the Democratic side as well, but it will be very interesting to watch how that plays out, certainly as the Republican Party tries to grapple with the potential of losing the White House and then try to plot a comeback for 2024.
Yeah, because there really is no middle ground that seems to be apparent there on the Republican side. It's either you support the president or you don't. It doesn't seem that there's much room in the middle there. I want to ask you as well, Zeke, we had seen the president repeatedly attack mail voting. Is it clear how that may have affected the vote count?
It's not 100% clear just yet, but there are indications, that by discouraging his supporters from using mail-in votes, number one, in terms of the pace of the counting, they're not, we now know with fairly good certainty that if there are mail votes out there, that have not been counted yet, because a lot of these states counted Election Day votes first, mail-in votes, later are ongoing. Those mail-in votes are predominantly Democratic. So that's affecting that. So the pacing of the vote count, but also the president may have left a lot of votes on the table from people who were not necessarily comfortable going into a polling place in the middle of the pandemic, and an election this close and this close in so many states that could have been decisive. Not that it was, but it's the sort of thing that could have moved the needle a little bit closer in his direction if he had been sort of more forceful and if he had embraced mail-in balloting the way that Democrats did.
Right. Well, Greg, Georgia is largely run by Republicans. How are they responding to President Trump's claims?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, because they're keeping one eye on the Senate runoffs we have here on January 5th. They don't want to alienate the president at all. And the Republicans in Georgia, the Never Trump movement has basically been stamped out in Georgia. So Republicans have not distanced themselves from the president at all. But at the same time, they're also not amplifying his claims of fraudulent votes in Georgia. Last night, Donald Trump Jr. held a rally in Atlanta, right outside the Georgia Republican Party's headquarters. It was interesting to see who showed up and who didn't. And who showed up were a few fringe politicians, a Democratic state lawmaker who endorsed the president, one or two state senators, but no top-level Republican officials. And earlier today, the governor, the Speaker of the House, and the lieutenant governor all issued a joint statement, essentially saying they wanted a fair count of legal ballots, so kind of mirroring Republican language, but also not amplifying the president's claims that there was some sort of misconduct. And then the Secretary of State's office said the same thing. There's been no evidence in Georgia whatsoever of any sort of widespread fraud.
All right. Well, Caitlin Huey-Burns, Zeke Miller, Greg Bluestein, somehow it seems fitting that in 2020, all of this could be drawing to a close on a Friday night of all nights. Thank you all so much. Really appreciate your time.